13 roads. Here is a tale I have not yet forgotten. Listen. Tonight it is Maret Sol, last keeper of the grief column, and the thing she proved was already inside the smoke before the smoke left the ground. 3 facts you need before the rest makes sense. First, for 900 years, the city of Anduvel has burned its dead in a column of white smoke that rises exactly 400 feet and then stops. Not disperses, not thins, not catches a wind. Stops. A ceiling no hand has ever touched. Second, the smoke is not white because of what burns. It is white because of something in the stone chimney throat below the pyre platform. Something worked into the mortar at the founding of the city. Something that was called, in the old Anduvel tongue, Sol Verath, the grief address, the formal letter to the gods. Third, Maret Sol spent 11 years climbing the roofline scaffolding of the column every dawn to measure the height of the previous night's burn. And on the morning she recorded that the ceiling had dropped by 4 feet since her predecessor's first measurement, she did not go to the priests. She went higher. What she found at the top of that smoke is the thing I cannot stop thinking about. The column itself stands at the center of Anduvel, the way a spine stands in a body. Everything else organized around it, dependent on it, slightly curved toward it in posture. The city's founders sank the chimney base 40 feet into the bedrock before they built a single wall of any house above. The pyre platform at the top, carved sandstone worn soft as old soap by 3 centuries of fire and rain, sits 60 feet off the ground, and the stone throat of the column rises another 200 feet above that. 260 feet of worked granite, and then open air, and then 400 feet of smoke that does not move the way smoke is supposed to move. Maret had measured it since she was 19. She had taken the post from her teacher Odrin, who had held it for 30 years, who had taken it from his teacher before him in an unbroken line of measurement going back to the first keeper who set the original stone benchmark. A notch cut into a wooden pole that is now rotted away, preserved only as a measurement in the founding records. 412 feet to the cessation point, year 1 of the column. 412. By the time Maret inherited the post, the height of the ceiling was 406. 6 feet gone in 300 years. Slow enough that every previous keeper had called it variation, seasonal drift, instrument error. Maret was the first to lay all the records side by side in the same room and see it as a line. The line was not flat. The line was descending. She brought her finding to the head archivist of Anduvel, a man named Cosper Dane, who wore a ring on every finger and whose office smelled of river clay and old cheese. He thanked her and poured tea. The finding went into a folder. The folder went onto a shelf. Maret went back to the column. She was not angry. She was something more dangerous than angry. She was methodical. What I know of Maret, I know from the investigation documents. 314 pages, eventually, tied with wax cord in the column's own archive room at the base of the chimney. A room that smells exactly the way you would expect a room to smell, that has sat 6 inches from 9 centuries of sacred burning. Like a long memory, like something expensive, almost entirely spent. She was 41 years old when she began climbing. Not climbing the scaffolding, she had done that every dawn for 11 years, climbing into the column's interior space. Up the maintenance ladder bolted inside the chimney throat, into the heat-darkened chamber where the smoke collected and organized itself before it rose. The ladder ends at a grated iron platform 240 feet up, just below the chimney's open crown, and that is as high as any keeper had ever gone since the column was built. The grate is locked from below. Maret had the key. She climbed at night, during an active burn. She had calculated the airflow. She knew the smoke did not pour back down inside the chimney. The column's geometry draws everything upward, the same way the founders intended, the same reason the Sol Verath worked in the first place. She brought a lamp with a sealed glass face, a notebook, a length of rope, and a brass instrument of her own design, a weighted arm on a pivot, calibrated to detect the cessation point by measuring pressure differentials in the rising column of smoke. She called it the finder in her notes. What she found on the first night was nothing she had not expected. The smoke rose clean and white past the grated platform, past her face, into the open crown above, and then beyond, into the darkness. And she could track its height by the faint luminescence it carried, that white within white quality that the Sol Verath gives it, like a sound you can almost hear. She deployed the finder. The cessation point that night measured at 403 feet. She wrote that down. She came back the next burning night, and the one after that. She was building a short-term data set to compare against the long-term record. On the seventh night, the smoke stopped at 398 feet. Not 403, not somewhere in between. A single night's drop of 5 feet. Maret's notes for that page are written differently from all the other pages. Normally, her handwriting is the handwriting of a woman who has been recording numbers for 2 decades. Small, exact, slightly forward-leaning. On that page, the numbers are the same. The sentences around the numbers are not. She wrote, "I heard something above the cessation point. I cannot characterize the sound except to say it was the sound of attention, not wind, not settling stone. I believe something noticed me noticing it." I have read those lines a number of times. She went back. Of course she went back. She went back 17 nights in a row, and the cessation point held at 398 feet, and she heard nothing else unusual, and she began to think she had made an error, that the 7-foot reading was instrument error, that she had frightened herself with her own annotation. Then, on the 18th night, she climbed to the grated platform, and the smoke was not there. Not absent. The burn below was active. She had confirmed it before she climbed. She could hear the pyre platform's fire below her, could feel the heat rising in the chimney throat. But when she reached the platform and looked up through the crown, the smoke was stopping 4 feet below the iron grate, 4 feet below where she stood. The cessation point had descended below her. Her instrument confirmed it. 394 feet. Less than the height of the chimney itself. The smoke was not reaching the open air. Maret sat on the grated platform for a long time. She wrote that she tried to understand what she was observing physically, how smoke could cease to rise below the level of the crown inside an active column of heated air. She could not explain it. The smoke was there. She could see the faint luminescence below her feet through the iron grate. It simply stopped, as if something were pressing down on it from above, and the downward pressure was winning. She wrote, "I have been measuring the wrong thing. I assumed the ceiling was fixed, and the smoke was failing to reach it. I now believe the ceiling is not a ceiling. I believe it is a mouth, and the mouth has been moving closer for 900 years." That is the line that rewrites everything that came before it. She spent the following 4 months reconstructing every keeper's measurement in the archive. Not just the endpoint number, the note margin observations, the weather records, the reports of unusual phenomena during burns. There were 43 margin notes across 900 years of records that described something similar. A sound above the smoke, a pressure. One keeper, 200 years before Maret, had written a single word in the margin beside an anomalously low measurement. Hungry. And then the next entry resumed normal notation as if nothing had happened, because in a single generation, nothing seems to happen. The line is too slow for one life to see. Maret could see it now. She could see it very clearly. She went to Cospedane again. This time she did not bring a folder. She brought the finder. She brought her 17 nights of observation logs. She brought the 200-year-old margin note with the word hungry. And she brought a second instrument she had built since the first visit, a sensor that measured not pressure, but what she called soul draw, the particular quality of the grief-addressed smoke, its concentration of the Sol Verath property, the reason the smoke was white. She showed him the readings. Above the cessation point, When she extended the sensor on a long pole into the space above where the smoke stopped, the Sol draw reading was 0. Whatever was above the smoke had already consumed the grief address. It had already taken the thing that made the smoke a letter to the gods. What was left, what dispersed invisibly into the upper air above the column, was ordinary smoke from ordinary burning. The letter was already opened. The letter was already read by something that was not the gods. Cosper Dane looked at her for a long time. He poured no tea. He said, "If this is correct, then every person buried by this column for 900 years. He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. Maret finished it in her notes that evening. She wrote, "Has had their grief eaten before it arrived. Whatever we have been feeding for 900 years has received 900 years of grief and has been sustained by it and has been growing on it. And the growing has brought it lower and lower, and it will eventually reach the pyre platform. And when it reaches the pyre platform, the question of what it does next is a question I do not have the instruments to answer." She submitted a formal petition to the city council to halt the column, to cease all burns until the nature of the entity above the smoke could be determined, to investigate what 900 years of grief had been sustaining. The petition was denied. The column was the city's founding institution. To halt the column was to halt the grief address, to abandon all the dead who had already been burned there to whatever intermediate state existed between a properly delivered grief and the silence of no delivery at all. The council was not wrong to consider this. The city's relationship to its column was not merely ceremonial. It was the architecture of how Anduvel understood loss. To close the column was, in some functional sense, to tell the living that everything they had ever surrendered to the fire had gone nowhere, had fed something local and hungry, rather than the gods. The council preferred the uncertainty of Maret's findings to the certainty of that announcement. I understand why they decided what they decided. I am not sure I could have decided differently. Maret continued her measurements. She had no other tool. The cessation point, over the following 3 years of her documented observations, dropped another 9 feet. The rate of descent was accelerating. She noted this in her final archive entry, which is dated 6 months before she disappeared. I say disappeared. The archive says retired. The column's records show a new keeper named Paul Virant taking the morning measurements the following season, with no explanation of the transition and no farewell entry from Maret in the record. Paul Virant's measurements make no reference to anomalous cessation heights, no reference to a finder instrument, no reference to a margin note from 2 centuries prior. But Paul Virant's handwriting, in those first 3 months of entries, has a quality I recognize from Maret's 7th night notation. The sentences around the numbers are different from the sentences of a confident keeper settling into routine. They are the sentences of someone who has been told to write normally and is trying very hard. I have climbed the column. I did it 3 months ago, which is why I am telling this story in this particular register, with this particular note of something I have not been able to put down since. I climbed to the grated platform at night, during a burn, the way Maret did. I brought a lamp. I did not bring a finder because I did not have a finder, but I brought my own instrument, which is simpler and less precise and more personal. I brought my attention. The smoke stopped, 12 feet below the grated platform. I could see the white luminescence below me through the iron bars, that grief white, that solverath quality, like a sound almost heard. And above it, nothing. Clear air. The open crown of the chimney above me, and the night sky above that, and stars. And above the cessation point, in the clear air between the stopped smoke and the open crown, the smell, not of smoke, not of fire, not of old stone, something else, something that I have smelled once before on a different road entirely, and that I will not name here because naming it here would require me to explain a connection that I am not yet certain of. And I have learned that uncertainty and certainty both have costs, and you pay them differently. What I can tell you is this: the smoke rises, the smoke stops. The thing that stops it is lower than it was when Maret measured, lower than it was when I climbed 3 months ago. I know this because I went back last week, on my way to this telling, and the difference was measurable even without instruments, even with only attention. 900 years of a city's grief, and the thing that has been eating it has grown very large on the diet, and it is moving toward the ground the way something moves when it is no longer content with what falls into its mouth, when it has developed preferences, when it has learned that the source of what it feeds on is below, and below is a direction it is capable of moving in. Maret wrote, in the last full entry before her final one, "I do not know what it wants at ground level. I only know that it has been patient for 900 years, and patience that long is not the patience of a thing that can be reasoned with. It is the patience of a thing that already knows how the story ends. I do not know what happened to Maret Sol. I know what the new keeper's handwriting looks like. I know what the cessation point measures now. I know the smell in the cleared air above the stopped smoke. And I know that there is a road that runs east from Anduvel. Not the road I came in on, a different one, older, with a different kind of traffic than the roads I usually walk. And that something was seen on that road 6 months ago that matches no traveler who left the city by the eastern gate. Whether that something was walking toward the road or away from it, no one I spoke to could agree. There is always another road. There is always another traveler. The smoke rises every night in Anduvel, and every night the ceiling is a little lower, and somewhere above the white grief light, something patient opens wide. I will tell you what I find on the eastern road when I find it. I am already walking.